I am a former police officer who worked as a deputy sheriff here in Central Florida. I had been working in law enforcement for around 6 years. I am not a novice or rookie by any means. On January 19th, 2007, I was working as a school resource officer at a middle school here in Orlando, Florida. I was sitting in my patrol car in a parking lot on the east side of the building when I noticed a man walking across the parking lot. I was in uniform and had my marked patrol car parked in a visitor parking spot in front of the school. I was busy writing in my notebook and did not think much about the man at first. I thought he was a parent picking up a student. But the man did not come into the school like a parent should, and did not look like one. I watched the man walk around the back of the building and then appear on the other side. He was walking very slowly, deliberately, and with his head tilted downwards toward the ground. He looked very strange. He was wearing a white shirt and white pants, and was also wearing a black jacket. Keep in mind it was like May or June, very hot in the Florida heat. The man stopped walking, looked straight up at me, and then walked slowly towards my car. I put my notebook down and realized immediately something was wrong. I could see his face clearly as he approached my car. His eyes were jet black, and all around his eyes were very dark. He had a very weird look on his face. He did not look right. It was almost as if he was doing this on purpose, maybe trying to scare me. He wasn't walking normal either. He was walking very deliberately, very slowly. When he got to my car, he walked around it, then walked around the other side. He was now standing about 5 feet away from my car. He was a white male, about 6'1", very thin. He also looked very unnaturally skinny, like he was just skin and bones, but his arms and legs were too long. It didn't really make sense. His face was also strange too, the closer I looked. His nose was kind of unnaturally long, and I would describe it as kind of similar to that of a beak or a hook. His face was also very slender and stretched. I reached for my taser because I felt imminent danger from him. This guy was bad news. I kept my gun in my holster. I did not want the situation to escalate to the point to where I would be forced to use deadly force. I reached across my body, grabbed my taser, and as I did, the man turned and slowly walked away. He began to walk away while staring at me. I got out of my car and followed him. We walked very slowly, about 3 feet every 5 seconds. I told him to stop, but he would not turn around. I walked up to him, grabbed him by the shoulder. He stopped and spun around, and grabbed me by the neck and pulled me close to him. His hands and fingers were disgusting, and he smelt like rotting meat. He had long black nails that dug into my throat. I reached for my gun. I pulled it out and pointed it at him, demanding he stop. I told him I was going to shoot him if he did not let me go. But instead, this excited him, it seemed. He grabbed hold of me even tighter, tried to pull me close. It was in that moment that he pulled back his lips, revealing a mouthful of black, rotten, sharp teeth that resembles more of a shark than anything. I was in fear for my life, so I fired 2 shots into his chest. He stood there for a second, then collapsed to the ground. He did let go of my neck. I took a few steps back, and he laid on the ground face down. He was not moving. I radioed dispatch and told them that I just shot a man. I told them that the man was attacking me, and that he had dark, rotten teeth, black eyes, and he looked wrong. There was something very wrong about this guy. He did not look right or act right in any way. So, I could see the man was breathing slowly. He was not bleeding from the gunshot wounds like I had thought. As I watched him, I noticed that his back was very weird. He did not have any muscles, at least that were visible. No tone at all. It was just skin. I could see almost every rib. I could see every vertebrae in his spine. The back of his jacket that he had on and shirt were almost ripped at the back. So, when he was on his face, His back was almost entirely exposed. It was very bizarre. His arms were unnaturally thin, like I said. I watched him breathe for about 5 minutes, but he wasn't really moving. I cautiously approached him with my taser drawn. I still did not want to get too close. I had told dispatch that I was going to check him for a pulse, to try and get some paramedics, when the shots were initially fired. So, I knelt down beside him and felt his neck for a pulse. I could not find one. I found a very weak and rapid pulse by his wrist. I told dispatch I thought he was close to death. When paramedics had arrived, just a few minutes after the 5-minute mark, they radioed back and told me I had just shot a homeless man. I told them that he was not homeless. He did not appear homeless. He looked very strange. I gave the description of the man, and they said they would send a crime scene unit to the location. The paramedics even checked the man for a pulse, but they couldn't find one. I told them to try again, and they did. They found a very faint pulse. The paramedics said the man would probably die from the gunshot wounds, although they were concerned why there was never any blood, just this thick, black ooze pouring out of the wound. The paramedics also said they had never seen anything like this before. The man looked like an unnatural skeleton, and I know he was not dead yet, but they needed to hurry. They said they were doing everything they could, so they called for a helicopter to transport the man to the hospital. The helicopter landed in the parking lot. The paramedics put the man on a stretcher, loaded him into the chopper, and they took off, headed for the hospital. I went inside the school and asked one of the office workers to tape off the area. I then went to my car and called my supervisor to tell him what had happened. I told him that the man had attacked me and that I had shot him. He said he would meet me at the hospital where the man was being transported. The crime scene unit arrived and I took them to the scene. They took pictures and I gave them a full statement. I then went to the hospital and met with my supervisor. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. He asked me what had happened. I frankly told him I don't know. Whatever I encountered was not normal. Out of all the years I've seen drug addicts and psychos and domestic violence, this man was wrong. Everything about him. A dark face, his teeth, his eyes. This was not a normal person. I almost even doubt he was human. I know that sounds far-fetched, but when you deal with it face to face, there was something so off. So, we went to go see the man and the paramedics were treating him. They were giving him fluids and were doing everything they could, but he was acting psychotic, groaning and screaming, but not in pain. He was also bleeding badly, if you could call it that, except there was no blood. It was just this thick black ooze running all down his body. I've never seen anything like it. His smell was even worse than before. The entire room smelled just like rotting meat. He began convulsing violently and began screaming and speaking in a language none of us have ever heard before, with a different voice. And then, shortly thereafter, he had passed. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what he was, because I can tell you from dealing firsthand, I'm confident that this was in no way human. I saw a dogman in the summer of 2009. I was out at my family's cabin in northern Michigan, near the towns of Vanderbilt and Mackinac. It had been a hot day, and we decided to camp out on the property. We had a fire going, and we were sitting around the fire. My two brothers and I were out grilling, hanging out. It was very dark, and there was no moon that night. I happened to look up at the sky and saw a large, dark figure moving quickly across the sky. It was moving so fast that it looked like a blur. It was heading in a south-southwest direction, and I noticed that it was not a bird. It had no wings. It was not a plane because it was not moving like one either. It was simply a huge black figure that was gliding across the sky, very large. It was also very low in the sky, no higher than a few 100 feet up. It was moving very fast. I had never seen anything like that before. So, in fear of what I was seeing, I ran inside, woke my two brothers, and we all went outside to see if we could spot that creature or animal again. As we're standing outside for a few moments, we notice a strange noise coming from around my brother's tent that he had set up for the dogs. It was a strange kind of growling noise, a mixture between a dog and a wolf. It sounded like a dog, but with a deeper growl. So I ran over to the tent, unzipping the door, and I saw my brother's two dogs, an Australian Shepherd and a German Shepherd inside. They were both nervous, uneasy, and growling. I could hear something moving around near the tent, and it sounded like a large animal. Now I was scared, more so because of how the dogs were acting. They could sense something was wrong. I managed to get the dogs out of the tent. My brothers decided to go with me, and we all stood there in the dark. That's when we heard a very loud noise coming from near the woodpile. It sounded like a growl mixed with a roar, and sounded like it was coming from a very large animal. We turned on some flashlights and saw the creature standing behind the woodpile. We saw it very clearly. It was a huge, hairy creature that kind of looked like a werewolf. I was terrified. The creature was no more than 70 feet away from us. It had long, black, stringy hair, and hair all over its face. It appeared very muscular and lean, and tall. It was kind of a mixture between a dog and a man. Long, pointed ears, and what appeared to be a skinny tail. I could not see its eyes very well. This creature, though, was growling at us. We all stood there for about 2 minutes, and then it turned around, slowly, and walked off into the woods. It moved quickly, but it also kind of hunched over. I never saw it again. I'm not a hunter, and I have never killed anything. I am in fact very anti-hunting, but I've never put it past myself to actually buy and own a gun, because maybe now's a good time to start doing that. In the summer of 2007, I was working at Camp Lost Isle, a small island off the coast of northern Michigan. My job was to run the kids program, which involved taking kids out on the wilderness adventures for days, or leading them in arts and crafts. That summer, I had a couple of kids come to me and talk about seeing a monster. You see, this was not uncommon. At that camp, the woods were very mysterious and scary. So, it was not surprising that kids had seen ghosts or monsters and other strange things. Myself, I was always skeptical about these stories for the same reason adults tell children not to talk to strangers, because adults don't believe in ghosts and monsters. But, you see, these kids were insistent. They told me they had seen a monster with yellow eyes and a face with a long snout, kind of like a coyote. I didn't believe them at first, but then I began to notice other kids talking about this same monster. Soon, that monster was all anybody would be talking about. One kid said he had seen it during an adventure in the woods, and another said he had seen it from her cabin window. It was at that moment that I began to believe there might be some truth to this thing. Maybe it was just a simple misidentification, but something was going on. I just didn't know what or how real, until one night, as I was lying in my bunk, I heard something stepping on the roof of the cabin adjacent. It was very loud, and it sounded like a person stomping on a tin roof. I jumped up out of my bed, shined a flashlight around, but the noises had ceased and I could see nothing. So, after a couple of moments, I went back inside. Now, the following night, I heard the same thing. Ran outside, looked around, didn't see anything. After that, it started to affect my sleep. I was scared to go to bed. I eventually confronted one of the camp counselors about this monster. I asked her if she had seen it, and told her my experiences. I explained that kids had been talking about it, and maybe, just maybe, it was their way of dealing with the fear of being away from home. So, I decided at that moment, I would have to investigate this on my own. So, on one of the evenings, I followed the same path that the kids had been taking when they went to the bathroom at night. This trail led through the woods and eventually to the top of a small hill. I waited until it was late at night and then walked out there myself. There was not much but forest, and it was pretty dark. So I climbed down to the other side of the small hill and walked through the woods. I was not really sure where I was going, but I just kept walking. Eventually, I found myself standing at the edge of a forest. I had no idea where I was, but I felt like I was being pulled into the woods. I took a step forward. Then I heard something. I turned around quickly, and there in the darkness was a face with yellow eyes and a long snout. I knew right then that it was this monster. It was as if I could feel its energy. I knew, and it knew that it had seen me. I stood there frozen, and I heard something. It sounded kind of like a voice, but it was nothing like I'd ever heard before. It was kind of like a combination of a roar and a whisper, and it was right behind me. I turned around and saw this thing. Next, it was standing next to me, and it was staring straight at me. I don't remember what had happened next. I think I must have blacked out because I woke up, and it was morning, and I was lying in the woods. I knew it was still early, so everybody would still be asleep. I walked back to camp, and I told nobody about what had happened, and I could not sleep that night. That night, though, the noises on the roof adjacent to my cabin were very loud. I didn't dare get out and look. I was so busy thinking about this monster. The next day after that felt even more different. It's hard to explain, and even after days and months the incident had occurred, I never did feel quite the same. Like something inside of me changed. The kids still kept talking about seeing this thing, and a couple of weeks, everyone began referring to it as a Wendigo. So, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Was this just some massive nightmare plaguing our camp? Or did I and everybody else encounter a real-life Wendigo? I lived in Point Pleasant at the time of the Mothman. I was 12 years old and remember it very vividly. I was sleeping over at a babysitter's house that was only about a block away from my home. For some reason, I woke up right at 3 a.m. I was lying in bed with my eyes closed, and I was thinking about the Mothman, wondering if he's going to come back. Then, I felt something in my spirit, my body, tell me that everything went wrong. I opened my eyes, and standing outside my window, I couldn't see anything but this black, dark shape, and I knew it was him. I was standing completely still, and so was it. This thing was staring at me. He was big and black and had red eyes. I was paralyzed with fear and could not move. About 30 seconds later, he just sort of melted back into the darkness out the window. I know it wasn't a nightmare. I was wide awake. Well, a few years go by, and I heard that the babysitter had been seeing this thing too, but she didn't tell anybody because she was too afraid that somebody would think she was crazy, and she would lose her babysitting gig. That's why I'm sure it was real. I live in the country on a dead-end road. I've lived here for 20 years, and I've seen many strange things. In fact, when we first moved in, I would see this big black dog with red eyes. It frightened me, but I would go out at night to try and see it. It appeared for years. One day, we were in the middle of a cornfield. The corn was about 10 feet high at the time. That might be an exaggeration, but it was pretty tall. We were walking in the middle of the field, and I just got a very bad feeling that somebody was watching me. I looked up and saw this pale man in a black suit with a hat standing in the corn a ways away. Now, I've had several strange encounters with things I can't exactly explain. I've also seen a large black dog with red eyes. I used to call him Bad Dog. I also see a strange figure with red eyes too. It is about the size of, I don't know, maybe me, but a little bit taller and broader. It shows up at night and watches me sometimes. These are just many strange things that happen around here. Safe to say, I don't really like to go out at night anymore. I feel like I'm watched constantly. I was living in Arizona at the time, and one afternoon, I was driving into Sedona on a dirt road. It was a very warm day, and I was driving with the windows down. I was a little lost, but I was sure I was going in the right direction. All of a sudden, I see this huge creature walking in the middle of the road. At first, I didn't know what it was. All I saw was a big mass of purple. It was kind of like the color of a lavender plant or a lilac, and it looked like it was maybe wearing a robe, but I couldn't be sure. It was the size of maybe 3 or 4 men standing on top of each other, freakishly tall. I stopped dead still and stared at it, not sure what I was looking at. It looked at me too, and I could tell it was looking at me. I saw 2 large eyes on the sides of its head, and they were huge black eyes. Then, it began walking towards my vehicle. I had no idea what to do, and it was so huge it was moving quickly. I was concerned that it could have killed me. So, I began to drive away as fast as I could. I did not look back, and I didn't stop until I got to town. I don't know if I had just seen an alien or what on earth I spotted, but it certainly was a freak of nature. I tried telling my friends about it, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was making it up, or I was drunk, which I was not. I have never told anybody about it until now. I haven't seen it since, and for some reason, I had to write about it. I still have the memory of it in my head. I can remember it to this day. I will never forget what I saw. It was easily one of the most frightening things I've ever seen, and strangest. I never saw what it was, but I heard more than enough for me to ever want to see what it looked like. I was going through this phase in my life where I was solo camping a lot, and this was a good way for me to deal with problems that I was going through. I felt like solo camping was kind of my escape. I'm usually a pretty big camper, but always end up camping with other people, like friends and family. I enjoyed the company, but I really enjoyed being alone, and the solace that comes with it, for just a couple of days. It allowed me to think and to clear my mind. This night, I was up in the foothills. I don't know what animal this was, and I can't claim it was one thing or another. But here's what I can tell you about what had happened. I had just finished setting up camp for the night, and was sitting, listening to the crickets and bullfrogs. Then, I heard something in the woods that sounded like a woman screaming. I didn't think much of it, until I heard it again. This time it was much louder. Then it screamed again, and this time, sounding like it was right next to me. I started to freak out a little bit, grabbed my flashlight. My hands began shaking. I stood up and I heard something moving quickly in the woods. It was big. I could hear branches and leaves breaking, leaves being crushed underfoot. I was so scared that I could not move. I just stood there in my tent, shaking like a leaf. It got closer and closer, and I thought it was going to come into my tent. Then, I heard it moving up the hill away from me. It was moving incredibly fast, and it was making these loud snapping, cracking, popping noises. I could hear it moving farther and farther away from me, until it finally stopped. I stayed up like all night, and I'm still freaked out by it. The next night that I went up to the top of the hill, I tried to find any sign of this creature. I didn't see or hear anything. I didn't find any tracks, nothing. But I found a bunch of broken limbs. It was like it came down the hill just to scare me, but then went back to wherever it came from. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but I know I don't ever want to see it again. I hope that this story has scared you enough to keep you from going. deep into the woods. I was on a long drive back from Texas through Nevada to my home in Southern California. The time was around 9 p.m. I was driving in a desert region of the state. I mean, well, all the state is desert, but this area is pretty lonesome. I was all alone on this long road. It was a simple 2-lane highway with no business nearby. You're kind of just out in the middle of nowhere. There were no streetlights or anything. It was not completely pitch black, because there was some light from the moon and stars. And as a person who lives in an urban area, I get a bit frightened driving in these kind of dark situations. So, I was driving cautiously. I had my car windows rolled down, and I was listening to the radio at a low volume. Then, I see the shape of something large flying directly towards my car. It flew directly in front of my car. I slam on my brakes. It was so fast. I could not make sense of what I was seeing. I saw it fly right in front of my car, so I instantly stopped. I was still trying to figure out what I saw, and I was looking around. I did not know what to do. I sat there in the car with the engine going, completely stunned, and I was not sure if this was a bird or a bat or maybe a person or something. I just knew it was something large and flying. Then, I hear this horrible screeching coming all from outside. I couldn't make out the direction, but I could hear something making the noise. Then, I began driving slowly, and I see this shape coming back towards the vehicle again. Now, I'm scared out of my mind, because it came rushing at my car and then swooped up in the air really fast. This thing looked like some large bat creature, but I couldn't really tell. I was too scared to look at it. It was flying right over me, and this time, I could hear the fluttering noise. I saw some shape, and this thing was flying in some erratic flight patterns. Then, it swooped down right on the road in front of my car, forcing me to stop. That's when my headlights illuminated this thing fully, and I saw every horrifying detail for the first time. It was a creature with a very large body, maybe the size of a man. It was covered in hair with an almost owl-like appearance. It had large wings, it was black in color, and had a very large head. It was not the head of a human, though. The head was more round and dome-shaped like an owl's, and it had really large black eyes, and a mouth with teeth. I could even kind of see a tongue sticking out. The mouth was open, exposing teeth, and it appeared to be breathing very heavily. It was also accompanied by a terrible odor, kind of like rotting meat that had been left in a hot dumpster for days. This thing was visibly standing on 2 legs with its wings folded up. They kind of looked like ratty, torn-up bat wings. Instantly, in my mind, I just knew this was some sort of demon. So I floored my car and swerved around it, barely missing it, getting up to 90. I could not believe this thing was real. I was so scared. I started going faster and faster, and I managed to get away. I drove for miles and miles, and for a couple of hours after, my adrenaline finally began to wear off. Now, I was feeling exhausted, and I think I just pulled over to a random pullout and tried to sleep. Even though I was very hesitant to do so, in case this thing came back, I probably didn't fall asleep till closer to maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, just because of how scared I was. I'm lucky that I never saw this thing again after that, and was not awakened in my car by this thing. I know what I saw. I know this was not a man in a costume. I know this was not a bird or any animal. This was a demon. I know that demons and evil exist, and this was no doubt a demon. I was lucky to escape. I believe this demon was doing something in the desert, and it targeted me. I believe this thing was maybe looking for something, or I just happened to drive in the wrong place at the wrong time. If these creatures are real, and they are capable of doing anything they want, who knows what it was wanting from me, or trying to do? Then, I always ask myself, why didn't it pursue me more? It could have if it wanted to. It clearly wanted my attention for something. Could it have possibly been there to warn me? I was born in a small town in western Kansas, and while there, I had a close encounter with a creature I call a skinwalker. I've been trying to study the whole skinwalker phenomenon for about 20 years now. I have come to the conclusion that a skinwalker is a shapeshifter from another dimension, and they can take the form of anything it wants. The incident I'm about to tell you about happened back in the summer of 1973. The strange creature I saw was about 7 feet tall, hairless, and had red glowing eyes. It was standing on the roof of my house. It had long arms and a long, thin neck, and a face that was long and pointed. It looked kind of like an ape, or something. It kind of had a bit of a shuffle to it. It was strange, and it was clearly not human. The one night, I was in my bed asleep, and I woke up to what sounded like a helicopter landing on the roof. I went to look out the window, and I looked out, and I see this huge, distorted figure standing on the rooftop. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I got my dad, and he took a look out the window. And of course, he didn't see anything. I told him it was still there. Then we both ran outside. When we got outside, the creature had disappeared. It was gone. It was too fast for us to catch. The next day, I told all my friends about it. They just thought I was making it up. This creature left a smell that was very strange, and there was a strong smell of sulfur, like you would smell in a chemical factory. I also smelled a strong manure smell. It was very unpleasant. It was the smell of death. I don't know what this creature was, but it was not human. It was a demon. I've been trying to figure it out for 20 years, and the next night, my father and I are getting out of our truck, and my dad gasps because he sees this being on our roof again, points, and I see it now too. The same creature was there. It looked to be about maybe 7 feet tall and had red glowing eyes. This thing jumps into the air and off behind the house. We both go into the house and slam the door. There would be times at night afterwards where we could hear this thing walking around the backside of the house, as if waiting for the right opportunity to do something. I tell you this story because you can believe it or not. I know what I saw. I am a former police city officer in Kansas. I know what I saw. I don't care what anybody says. I was born and raised in Kansas, and I tell you this with 100% certainty. I know what it was. At least, I'm confident I am. And I'm also confident that this wasn't a human in any way, shape, or form. This thing was ultimately terrifying. This was back in the summer of 2013, when I had my first experience with the unknown. Let me just put this in there and say, I can confidently say to this day, I'm not exactly sure what this thing was. I'll do my best to describe it to you, and maybe you can figure out what it is that I saw. I've never seen any animal like it, and never knew it existed. I also lived around a huge swamp plot of land, hundreds of acres of undeveloped marsh and swamp. I was walking home from school one day when I noticed something large in the trees moving close by. I thought it was maybe just a big dog at first, but as it began moving around, it turned out to be this giant lizard with a very long tail. This thing also was completely upright, like a grown man would, taller than I. I never in my life could imagine, or begin to imagine, seeing a fully two-legged lizard. I knew I was in shock when I saw it. I had no idea what this was. It was like a partial man, partial lizard hybrid. I was able to see its clawed feet and hands, as well as the lizard-like head and body. This thing was brownish in color, and had the most human-like eyes I've ever seen on a reptile. It did not have any hair on it at all. I believe it was looking for food, by the way. It was kind of walking and sniffing the air. I was able to see it for a few seconds before it realized I was looking at it, and then it ran off into the trees. I didn't know what to do or think. It was like I was in a trance. I was so shocked. I couldn't even move to call it for help. I just stood there in shock and disbelief. And I thought, did I just see that? In fact, for the next few days, I kept thinking about it over and over, just trying to rationalize and compartmentalize what I saw. I just kept telling myself it was the trick of the eye and maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I thought I was going crazy. I kept trying to just rationalize it over and over. But I knew I saw something. But I was so confused as to what it was. So I told a few of my friends about this thing that I saw, and they had no idea what it was either. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And about a full week later, I saw it again. The area where I saw it the very first time is very thick brush, trees, and swamp. Around this time, it was early June, just before school got out, so everything was very thick and lush. It would be really hard to get back there, let alone in a giant lizard suit. So that's why I never thought it to be somebody in a suit playing a prank. The second time that I saw it, it was moving slowly back towards the swamp in an area that's a little bit more cleared out, still littered with swamps and trees, just more open so you can see further back. And I caught movement out of my eye. I turn to look, and for a second, I see the same creature darting through the trees way back in there. It honestly made me shudder. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was a little more prepared this time because I saw it before it saw me. This time, I was able to get a better look at it. I was able to see its body and hands more clearly from this angle too, mainly just because of how large they were. It was very muscular, like a bodybuilder. It was standing in a wide-legged stance and watching me. I couldn't see its facial features very well because it was still far away, but I could see the shape of its head and eyes. I also saw its tail. It was much longer than before, and again it was brownish in color with splotches of green. This was no doubt a living, breathing creature. So I started to think about it more and more. And I thought, is this a mutant or something? But I didn't know of any radiation in the area. Look, I know that's probably a stretch to assume such a thing from what I saw, but I have no idea how to explain it away. Is it possible that giant human lizards live down here in the swamps of eastern Texas? I was 19 years old, studying in a college in a remote village in the Amazonian region of Peru. I was the only foreigner in my class. One day, I was walking down a trail in the jungle when I noticed a strange growth on the trunk of a tree. It was like an elongated wart and was about the size of a human hand. I looked at it more closely and it began to move. There was a small hole in the wart-like growth, and a brownish, moist, worm-like creature emerged and looked up at me. It was longer than 6 inches, with a tapered head and a very wrinkled, ugly body. It kind of resembled a worm, but moved like a snake. It had large black lidless eyes, and it was covered in these kind of gray-brown scales. It was very smooth and silky and shiny. I was shocked, and I stood there, staring at it. I called my Peruvian friend over, and he was just as shocked as I was. We stood there for a while staring at it. Then, after watching it, it kind of just slithered into a hole in the tree and disappeared. I was so fascinated that I forgot to take a photo. The next day, I went back to the same spot, but this creature was not there. Maybe I was hallucinating. But my Peruvian friend confirmed what I saw. I'm not sure what this creature was, but it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was nothing like the drawings of a snake or a worm, or anything that lives in this jungle. It was something alien and unknown. I thought I was going crazy, so I hardly have ever told anybody about this. I didn't even mention it to my other Peruvian friends. It was too strange. So I just put the experience in the back burner of my mind. I have not been back to the area since afterwards I left. I don't know what happened to that thing, or maybe there are more of them. Maybe it's an undiscovered species. I'm not sure. I wonder, though, how many people will ever even believe my story. I was sitting on the sofa in my living room with my wife and daughter. My dog was off to the side, lying down. I was petting my dog when something caught my eye. It was a shadow on the wall. The shadow was very tall, taller than my 6'4" height. I looked at the shadow and noticed that it looked like a person. Maybe it was just my wife in the kitchen, but when I looked at her, she was on the other side of the room. The shadow kind of moved across the living room, and I turned to look and could see it was somebody outside, a tall bipedal creature. It had long arms and legs and a shorter torso. It had kind of a more elongated neck with a small head. The body had an almost plump appearance, and it was covered in dark hair. The head was also covered in long hair. It was very strange looking. My entire family was gasping at what we were seeing. This was like a man in some sort of suit, but obviously not a man in a suit. It appeared as if whatever this thing was moving from one patch of woods to the next, and was acting stealthy. It was moving very slowly, as if it was being very cautious. No matter where it stepped, it was always in view. I was afraid to look away for fear of it being gone. We watched it move from back to the front of the house. It then went into the other patch of woods, and we lost sight of it. It was maybe 7 feet tall. The area around here is swampy, so I assume that's where it's been living. It walked on 2 legs, by the way. The creature appeared to be very wary of anything around it. I believe it was checking out the house to see if there were maybe anyone around it, to hopefully not be seen. It did not seem aggressive, and it was very quiet, but I do not think that it was sneaking up on us. It was easily the strangest thing we have all ever seen. I'm not sure of the time of this incident, though. I would guess maybe 10:30 at night. So, did we see a Bigfoot, or was this something else? Okay, this is easily the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm serious, and I will never forget it. I was walking home from a family dinner at about 9:30 p.m., a little bit tipsy. I was walking along a gravel path near a creek when I see this strange thing emerge from the water. I froze. It was a creature that appeared to be a cross between a reptile and a seal. It was about 3 feet long and about 2 feet high. It had scales, but kind of had flippers. Its head was shaped kind of like a seal's, but it had a long snout, like that of a caiman, and beady little yellow eyes. I was horrified. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth, and its jaws were wide open, and it came right at me. I almost fainted. I was so startled and scared. It hissed, and it sounded very threatening. I turned and ran, but it was chasing after me very quickly. It was faster than I thought it would be. I couldn't believe what this thing was. It chased me for a couple of minutes before I lost it. It tried to get me, but I was too fast for it. It kind of moved like a lizard does, but it was built more like a reptile than a seal. I don't really know what to say about it, and I don't think I'll ever forget about what I saw. It's too crazy. I don't know what it is or why it exists, and I have no idea how I was ever able to sleep afterwards. I know my account might seem ridiculous and far-fetched, but believe me, I've never imagined anything looking like a failed science experiment to come out of the water and try to strike me. It's easily the most disturbing thing I've seen. A couple of years back, my husband was driving me home from work, and I was sitting in the passenger seat of his car. We were stuck in traffic. It was around dusk and getting dark. We were on a rural road, and it was a very clear night. We stopped at a red light when I noticed something. As I was staring straight ahead, I noticed something off to my right, in the woods to the side of the road. It was standing there, looking at me. To start with, it was very dark in color, and very dark in the woods. There wasn't much light, but I was able to see this. Because there was an automatic flagger and road work up ahead. The several cars of traffic in front of us, I'm sure, saw it too. The figure was covered in hair and very tall like a man. It had a very elongated face with large black eyes. It was staring right back at me. It kind of just slowly crept back into the woods from where it came. I'm sure others saw it too. They had to have. I mean, it was right there. My husband and I were terrified, but we were stuck. There was nowhere we could have moved or gone. After it disappeared, I'm telling my husband this thing might come back, and we kept talking, trying to figure out what it was. The flagger turned green, and we all drove off and did not end up seeing that thing a second time. I know what I saw, and I believe it. It was some sort of large beast that had human-like features and covered in hair. I'm not sure what it was. I don't believe in Bigfoot, and I don't think it was a Bigfoot, even if I did believe. While the body looked like a human's with thick hair, kind of like a bear's, the face was animalistic. I don't think it was a bear either. I didn't see any claws or teeth, but it just had to have been some sort of wild beast. Some kind of unexplained animal. Was this thing trying to communicate? I don't know. I'm just glad it didn't attack me or my husband. I mean, it was scary. I'm not sure if this was some kind of swamp creature or what. I just know what I saw, and it was very, very terrifying.